Ryan Williams. You see this book here. This is his book, The Influencer Economy, How to Launch Your Idea and Share It to Thrive in the Digital Age. He's in town from LA. He's had numerous tech startups. He is the founder of Ryno Labs, and they're a digital publishing company that helps out startups and brands and entrepreneurs. And his goal is to one day create a school, and they're on their way to doing that, create a school based on the principles in this book. So please give a warm welcome to Ryan, and he is going to hopefully blow your minds. I think he will.
Thank you, Philippe. Hey, y'all, keep it going for Philippe and Adam and Molly, everyone here. And for yourselves for coming out for free pizza on a Wednesday. And Helpfest is awesome, actually. One of my podcast guests that I'll get into in a second, Rishi K, who has a podcast called Song Exploder, did an amazing talk there and a conversation. So this is my book, The Influencer Economy. I know there's other hashtags that you all use, but if you want to hashtag IEBook, and hit me up with any questions before, after, or during the presentation. So this is my book. It's been a 2+ year journey. I'm based in Los Angeles, and I've been touring. I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, Washington, D.C., and I was actually in New York City last night at General Assembly in the Flatiron District, and I got up at 6 a.m. to be here today, so I'm very thrilled that all of you are in the room right now. And so when you write a book, even though this is mostly about business and launching ideas, it's oftentimes a great way to do some self-reflection. And before I got into entrepreneurship and tech, I was a stand-up comedian, and I lived in Washington, D.C. And I realized doing stand-up is that you have to put yourself out there, and oftentimes you get rejected. And all these influencers that I spoke to for the book were always rejected, and they almost wear rejection like a badge of honor. And what a lot of people didn't know with me about the time, including some close friends, was that I was struggling with depression. And I actually didn't leave my apartment except for work and stand-up comedy. And comedy was a way to get out of the house. It maybe helped contribute to being depressed with the rejection, but equally helped me to get myself out there. And I was inspired by influence even back then, before web video and the internet really took off. So while in Washington, D.C., surprisingly, there is a film community there. I would work on the weekend, and I did short films. Anyone here made short films? So it's easy now, but back in 8 years ago, it was a lot more challenging. So we made shorts in our neighborhood, and I ended up networking my way into the film industry. And who here has watched The Wire? Look at this turn. Yeah, that's great. So I worked on season 4. And it was the education season, and spoiler alert, they found a dead body in the house. Just, I don't want to, burst your bubble here, but they found a dead body on The Wire. And I worked in this episode in Baltimore, and I would work as crew. And so what I realized is with Hollywood, was the most talented people often didn't get the jobs. And it really was who you know, and the power of networking was a massive way to get your foot in the door. And I also realized that you gotta play the long game. And the best advice I got in entertainment was, it's all about attrition. And the second you give up and you move home from Los Angeles or wherever you are, you actually, the next person in line takes your place. And so it's really how much, people say how hungry you are, but I look at it more like it's attrition, that the second you give up, someone's gonna take your slot and seize your opportunity. So from Los Angeles, my then girlfriend, now wife at the time, DC, we moved to Los Angeles, where I worked on shows like Ugly Betty. Anyone remember that show? And I worked on a National Geographic documentary about aliens in Roswell, New Mexico. So anyone questioning that there were no aliens, we debunked the myth, so tell your family and friends. Ultimately, I was fascinated by tech entrepreneurship. And one of the reasons why I left entertainment was because I felt like the opportunities in digital around video content were much more bigger and opportunistic for me than trying to work on a TV show or documentary about discovering aliens. And ultimately, I worked for a company called Digicent, and 7 years ago we got acquired by Disney, and we did all of our in-house social media with Pixar and their parks brands, launching them on YouTube and Facebook. Then went to a company called Machinima. Has anyone heard of it? Are you a gamer? Yeah, so it's a gaming channel on YouTube. At the time I was there 5 years ago, we were getting 4 billion video views a month. At one point, we were valued at $200 million and had investment from Google. We actually all said and done raised about $60 million. And the valuation went down when I left. I'm not saying there's a correlation, but it's no longer sadly valued at $200 million. But we were a massive company, and that's when I really was understanding the power of influencers. And I went to a gaming event with Dwight Howard from the NBA. So he was there, and then these gamers were there. And the gamers had a line of hundreds of people to do signings and autographs. And Dwight Howard had a face palm, just because no one was in line. And I was like, this is amazing, because Dwight Howard's a global celebrity, but these influencers move the needle in these niche communities. So after I left Machinima, I went to a company called State, and they're based in London, and we built an API, structured semantic opinion network, raised about $14 million, launched, we did a keynote at TechCrunch Disrupt. So I was going to all these conferences, and I was speaking at them, and my colleagues and bosses were as well. And so what I realized was these influencers were the phenomenon that were transcending tech products. And they were helping propel the products like YouTube, Twitter, now Snapchat to the next level. So ultimately, I launched a podcast. And I felt like I needed to get my foot in the door with influencers because I had a big vision to write a book about the influencer economy. So 5 years ago, I coined this term. I bought the web domain. I wrote a blog post. I didn't touch it for 2 years. I kicked off the podcast. And now, 93 episodes later, I talk to best-selling authors that self-publish their way to the top, world-renowned YouTubers, podcasters, like Rishi K that I mentioned, who was at Mogfest. And ultimately, I've been able to apply the influencer economy principles to launching my book. So anyone here know this gentleman on the left named Bernie Burns? It's a company called Rooster Teeth. They did a series called Red versus Blue. It's in Halo Machinima, very niche. If you were 15 years old and played Halo, you would want to get a selfie with him, give him a big hug. He is a rock star in the gaming world. And I talked to people like Shiva Lazar, who hosts an event called Tubathon in Los Angeles. It's like a modern Jerry Lewis telethon format, where you hashtag Tubathon and money goes to charity from a sponsor. And that's me at VidCon wearing a hat and telling the people there I've been there for 5 years. But ultimately, these influencers that no one has heard of are rock stars in their industries. And so I talked to Freddie Wong, who has a video series called Video Game High School, where, anyone heard of this? He's crowdfunded for $2 million on 3 projects. And he was a trailblazer. After he crowdfunded his video series, Spike Lee and Veronica Mars and all these more traditional film and TV people went to crowdfunding. Troy Carter, I talked to him. He's a former manager for Lady Gaga. He now works with John Legend, and he got early into Uber and Lyft and Dropbox and a lot of tech companies. So he's pivoted his career. And then finally, Seth Godin, who I'm sure everyone here read his books. The Dip changed my life, and I got to him only because I had the platform. And what's interesting about all these people is none of them asked how many listeners I had for my podcast. They were just in good conversation. I had some credibility, what I'll get into about how I reached out to these people. And surprisingly, over 50% of the people that I reached on the podcast, I reached out cold. And I cold emailed them. I went to them at a conference. I met them at a conference a year ago, and I reached out to them blindly again, saying, hey, remember that conversation we had? So one thing I've learned is do not underestimate the power of cold outreach for reaching people through email. So ultimately, I synthesized these steps that I'll get into, where in order to thrive in the digital age, you don't need to go to business school, you don't need an Ivy League degree, you don't need a lot of money, and you don't need to know celebrities, but you need to learn the new business launch strategies from the influencer economy. And so I synthesized a lot of common characteristics with these influencers. And I felt like they all launched their idea, they shared it with others, and then they started thriving. And ultimately, this is emoji for all of the chapters. So each chapter has a philosophy that supports each step in the book. This is to reach the millennial audiences. So surprisingly, I go to talks and I ask people if they use emoji, and there's still people that have never used an emoji. So I don't want to out anyone here, but who here uses emoji? Who's not raising their hand? Okay, my mom didn't raise her hand. You don't use it? Oh, you're next level. Bitmoji, yeah. Who here uses Bitmoji? Everyone. It's a big North Carolina thing, I think. Yeah. So step 1 is launch. I have Kanye West on this slide, not because he's a celebrity, or he's a Kardashian, or he is an influencer, but ultimately, I got this great advice from one of my early podcast guests, this guy named Flula Borg, Anyone heard of him? You have? You've heard of him? Oh, great. You're my new favorite person in the room. So Flugelborg is a YouTube comedian. He does funny collaborations in his car where people do karaoke. That's now famous by James Corden. He did that a couple years ago. But ultimately, he told me, unless you're Kanye West, no one cares if you make mistakes. And you want to start when no one's watching, and your product breaks, your website goes down, you don't spell check your blog, and you make mistakes, your podcast audio is terrible, because that's when you learn the lessons and you get better and you hone your craft. And when you start making mistakes and you have an audience or community or customer base, that's when people start noticing. So the first philosophy for the launch step is crafting a big vision. I found out through talking to influential people with communities online, there were two ways to craft a vision. The first one is to just start making something, start building a product, start creating YouTube videos, blog posts, whatever your form is, and then a big vision comes over time. Or you have a big vision, like for me the book was my vision, and then you create smaller projects to keep you focused. And so I never would have had this book, I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't have my podcast. It was a weekly show. It got my foot in the door with influencers that I'll get into because a lot of them wrote book blurbs to help support me. And then you need to find smaller projects along the way or you lose focus for your big vision. A lot of people, they think perfection is key, and you need to just put your logo up and get it out there, and it's going to be ugly and you may change it. But in a lot of ways, people get endeared to you and invest themselves in you when they see your character with errors and flaws, and then they see you on the big stage succeeding, and they're more likely to support you even more because they've seen you through your early phase. Anyone know Chris Hardwick? If you watch Talking Dead, he does the after show for Walking Dead. He's a company called Nerdist, which is based in Los Angeles, and he started as a podcaster. And ultimately, the second philosophy for launching is picking a platform. And a platform is not just going on Snapchat and trying to gain a community there. It's actually more of a mindset. It's like, how can I help people? How can I give them value? And a digital platform is very important now because you want to use it as a way to connect to people. But ultimately, Chris, he embraces personality. And with influencers, I found out that your personality is your competitive edge. And that's what differentiates you with everyone else. Because other people can be like you, but if you find your characteristics that make you uniquely you, that you put into your product, you as the face of it, you as the creator, then that's what separates you from everyone else in the noise. And so I'm a firm believer in buying web domains and just having an idea and buying the website. And oftentimes I recommend, and this is maybe just me, but I pour a glass of wine or a big pitcher of beer for myself. It's a lot of alcohol. But I buy domains because I get sort of paranoid that someone's going to take the domain and take my idea. And also, like security, I have 50 domains that I get from my host provider that I need to renew, and oftentimes I renew 20% of them. But just the fact that it's out there becomes more real. And the influencer economy, I just bought the domain, and I was in an airplane, and I went to the web host provider, and I bought it, and then years later, I finally wrote the book. And then logos and all these characteristics, I found that people that actually start making stuff as simple as a blog, a logo, those are the people that are most likely to actually launch their ideas in the long run. So this is my father-in-law, which many of you may be wondering why my father-in-law is in the influencer economy. We have a tenuous relationship at best, and he is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, down the street, and he's a boiler company. So there are a lot of pregnant and awkward pauses when I talk to my father-in-law. And ultimately, I live in California, he lives in Raleigh, he has a boiler company, so you get it. But ultimately, we talked about platforms with him because he says he solves people's problems. And like I said, the platform is more of a way of thinking. It's not necessarily going to Snapchat or Twitter and amassing a community. So he helps people, they call him up, they say, hey, my boiler's not working, and he gives them free advice, they talk for 20 minutes, then they realize they can't fix it on their own, and they call him a week later, and the customer becomes someone that's a regular client of his. And so he tells me that you gotta solve pain points, and if you can develop a skill or a niche or something that is uniquely you, that you can offer people, that's an excellent way to build a platform. Did they go to sleep? Okay. So I had to include Jay-Z in the book. You know, he looks good, he's married to Bay, you know. But ultimately, he does a lot of jobs. And what I realized in the influencer economy is rejection is so common that you just fail continuously. And not the whole mythology of failure that you hear in Silicon Valley, like, oh, fail fast, fail fast. It's like, no, people actually like do a crappy job with their early releases with their products. But Jay-Z's a business, man, because he actually does everything. And when you launch ideas in the influencer economy, you have to be the web designer, the graphic designer, the social media manager, community manager, the technologist, because you can't afford to actually hire people. You're bartering, you're giving favors, you're back and forth, helping people with your skills and theirs. And so you have to do every job, and more importantly, you have to build a launch team. I always recommend people, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room do this, like to create a private Facebook group for your alpha community and start figuring out how to serve the needs of people in a private forum that they can give you constant feedback. And oftentimes that's the best way to launch an idea. And without my book launch team, you know, I never would have been here with the connections to Speak Enduro, I never would have had my tour. And ultimately you have to get people, hopefully, to invest in your idea, and the launch team is something everyone needs to think about ahead of time. Like, you need to think about your launch the second you start building your product, because it's never too early to build a community. And so the final trait in launching, characteristic, is the 99% of the people I talked to were all early adopters. And this is Freddie Wong, who I mentioned has the Video Game High School series. Anyone seen this series? Okay, so it has 100 million views across all his videos. It's a trilogy, crowdfunded $2 million over 3 projects. And he was the first YouTube partner to monetize videos, right? So he's early, there's less competition. He was one of the first people to crowdfund a movie with some sort of success. So he was able to migrate his YouTube community to Kickstarter. And like I mentioned, Spike Lee and Veronica Mars, all these people followed him. But ultimately, technology isn't just, like I said, being an early adopter on social media. It's like, how can you use tech? Like, how can you use AppSumo or Lead Pages to generate emails? Because I think emails are gold. That's the one thing I realized. Everyone who told me that I was launching a book said email lists are the only things that you need. Social media followers aren't as important. And I will be the first to admit I'm married, and I check my email in bed next to my wife before I sleep. And who here checks their email first thing in the morning in bed? I mean, feel free to, you know, join me in this struggle. I mean, my wife is on her phone checking her email when I'm next to her in my bed. It's just because we still have that habit, and it's often professional. That's another trend I realized was once people get out of college, that's when they realize email should be more of a channel that they take seriously. And so the curiosity is the trait around tech. And again, it's not necessarily the tech, it's the curiosity to find technology to be a solution and early adopt it. Ahead of time, develop the relationship with the person creating the tech, get that discount or deal ahead of time because you're using the platform. And so the next step 2, is share. And the reason why I showed all these books is because in my Facebook group, I mentioned with my email list, I workshopped about 20 book titles. Could be obsessive, it's up to you to judge me. But ultimately, if you look at all these covers, the one on the far left looks like something I don't really want it to look like, is what people told me, if you read between the lines. The one at the bottom looks like scientific. This isn't a scientific book. The one upper in the center, up top, looks too much like Twitter with the birds. The one below it looks more like YouTube, and it's not a YouTube-focused book as much. The one on the upper right looks like it's, you know, Scooby-Doo's Mystery Mobile from the 1970s. And the bottom right corner, that's just not on brand. Like, it's not a magnifying glass examining something. So I had a lot of people that gave me feedback. And what I found was, with influencers, twofold. One, you get the feedback on something like the book cover. So people invest in your idea, and they make it better, right? The second byproduct is the people that invest early. And I'm not saying you go out and run and show everyone what you're working on, but the people that invest early are more likely to share your idea and more likely to advocate for you. And so the people that I shared my book cover with were the first people to write Amazon reviews. They were the ones that pre-ordered the book and actually gave my book away for free to my email list, and I crowd edited the book. And so and my mom was just like, what are you doing? My wife's like, this makes no sense. But the advice I got from a lot of authors is, when you give your book away to your list, like, that's your community. And ultimately they made the book better, and everyone got a mention in the book that helped out. I pivoted the book. Originally it was gonna be just influencer stories from people I talked to, but I actually made it into a lesson and action plan for every chapter. because people told me I needed to hit the business points harder. And so by giving it out to people and getting that feedback, I found they were the most likely people to actually help me sell books. So anyone here listen to Mark Maron's WTF? It's a comedy podcast. He battles with alcohol and depression, and he talks about his anxieties and problems, and mostly speaks with comedians. But he recently had Obama, the president, on. And the thing about the platform that I mentioned is the platform is a way for you to get your foot in the door, and it could be big, it could be small. And Maron has his podcast in his garage in East Los Angeles. And he had Secret Service on his roof when the president came. But ultimately, his platform is credible enough that people want to come on to tell their story about their true selves. And I found out, like, authenticity, I love the word, and I hate the word. I mean, because it's like so overused in advertising and marketing. Who here likes that word? I mean, raise your hand. Okay, good. All right. I love it too. But I hate it a lot because ultimately the term means what it means. And so I position it more like you gotta find the truth in what you do. The truth in the product, the truth in the idea, the truth in the execution. And that's what people care about. And that's what happens with authentic people. And ultimately, if you stand behind what you believe in and what you want to create and share, that's equally as authentic. And influencers always strive to find that truth and to stand up for what they believe in. And that could be something like a product feature that you want in your idea that maybe everyone disagrees with on your team, but you stand behind it. Or it could be something as, as big as like Mark Maron talking about his alcohol addiction and really opening up. So I'm not recommending everyone talking about how much they drink, when they're pitching their idea to startup investors, but I think you get the point. So this is the Benihana rule. So the crux of the book really was inspired about influencers. And what I realized is influencers, and with any idea, they're a later stage group. And so I'll give you an example of, community collaboration. So ultimately, you have to follow the Benihana rule. So who here has been to Benihana? Are they big in North Carolina? Who here likes the food? I do not like the food. It makes me ill sometimes. I don't mean to, you can own it. So the chicken, I don't know, anyway, it's really oily and buttery. But the thing about Benihana is they open up the experience, they cook, they do tricks, you sit next to strangers, you have community at the table, and you leave with a shared experience. And so influencers, the trends are like, you don't need a huge community, you just need enough people to start your movement and to start letting them into the creative process. And this isn't just like going and pitching everyone you know, but building that friend list, finding the early adopters that really want to propel you and help you succeed because you're building something for them specifically. And ultimately, connecting through that open relationship is how influencers really thrive, because there's a sense of ownership in a spiritual way that people feel when they know what you're doing and there's an air of transparency. And the second part of collaboration is, I formed this based on Oprah Winfrey. You may recognize this as more of a GIF, or some of you may call it a GIF because you're a little, old school. But this is from when she's like, you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. And, for those of you who remember, Oprah used to be a king and queen maker. And if you were part of her book club, you would go bestseller in 24 hours. Twitter actually propelled into critical mass after the founders went on Twitter. And all these companies and ideas, like she really made them. And so this is what I call the reverse Oprah effect. So who here knows what a collab is? How do you define a collab?
Well, the way you said it sounds like musical collaboration.
Musical collaboration. What about you?
Yeah, music.
Any other definitions of collab? So there's an underground, you're both right, and it comes from music originally, and there's a definition for YouTube creators, they call it collabing. And I learned this like early on, that collabing is like, what's your area of focus? So let's say you're a YouTuber, and she has an operations and finance channel. It's not very big. So you only have 2,000 subscribers, and they're all members here. Operations and finance. So we want you to collab with someone bigger. So the idea is you have a channel, and what's an interest of yours? A little more interesting than operations and finance, because you have a big channel. Health and fitness. You have 150,000 subscribers. Let's say you have a million subscribers, and you have in the thousands. So you have a health and fitness channel, you open up the operation and finance channel with small subscribers, but she gets in your video, and then you go on her channel, and so you open up a small, more niche community. And so this collabing effect is how Instagram influencers take off. Because I don't know if you notice, you follow like Instagrammers, they'll tag people, and I realize there's a rule of 3. If you appear in someone's social stream as an influencer or with influencers, then that's when you actually start building a movement around your idea. And so collabing is really the bread and butter. And ultimately, if you want to collab with someone, don't ask them for coffee to pick their brain. Like the Coffees for Closers is, Glengarry Glen Ross, which is a great movie. But coffee is an old way to do things. You want to build a relationship with someone by asking them to see, can I show you my product? Can I write a blog post about you? Can you come on my podcast? Like ultimately all these influencers talked to me because I had a platform that was moderately interesting enough that had some social proof. And oftentimes people go to influencers way too early. And you have to bake a community together, get some social proof. So Willie Geist, who's on the Today Show, wrote a book blurb, and I know him. And influencers don't ask for favors, but they ask for help when the time is right. So what I learned was, I did 25 episodes of the podcast. I had other authors on like Willie. I didn't ask him to come on until I had that social proof, because I didn't want to appear like I was desperate, like I needed him to be the first or second guest to launch my podcast. Moreover, I studied Ashton Kutcher's and Lady Gaga's tweets. Anyone here friends with Ashton Kutcher? I mean, we're in tech, right? So I just want to make sure. No one's friends with him, so I can talk crap about him. So his tweets were terrible. His conversion was less than 0.5%. I studied his Bitly links. Ultimately, that's worse than a banner ad, which I hate clicking on. It's always accidental, and I want to throw my phone out the window. So that's what celebrities are with their conversion. When I was at Machinima with these gamers that were playing Call of Duty videos, and they had hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, millions of YouTube subscribers, I found out that the content collaboration was more important than sharing on Twitter. And so when you want to collaborate with an influencer, you want to come at them with a project, and you want to get their investment, and you want them to help you, and you want them to believe in you, because when they share it out, it's not a tweet. It's actually sharing it to their network because they're proud of the relationship. And so coffee is for losers. Coffee is no longer for closers. That joke works. I mean, it worked in DC, in San Francisco. I mean, coffee's for losers. Oh yeah, I mean, we just hugged everyone, come on. Throw me a friggin' bone. So ask to collaborate in a way that helps to create something together that then they can share, and never ask people to tweet about your product. Adam Grant, has anyone here read the book called Give and Take?
Yep.
It's an amazing book, I highly recommend it. So Adam Grant, my friend went to Wharton where Adam teaches. He cold emailed Adam and said, Ryan wrote a book about giving, your book is Give and Take, you should go on Ryan's podcast. And Adam's like, sure, here's my publicist. And then I sort of reached out to him again, and we started realizing we had people in common. So he came on my podcast, and he gave me half hour of his time. It was a great episode. I kept him in the loop about the book. I sent him an advance copy. I overnighted it for $80. I was about to have my second kid. My wife's like, why are you spending $80 to FedEx a book to this guy? I was like, I gotta get it to him, I gotta get it to him. I want him to see advance copy because he's an influencer, and he's someone that I want to collab with. Like his name on the back of my book is gold. It's really helpful in getting my foot in the door. So he asked me, what I wanted, to get out of the book. He comes back in 3 weeks and writes a blurb, right? Then Willie Geist from the Today Show, who I mentioned before, is more of a celebrity. I then went to Willie and said, hey Willie, I quoted you in the book, and pretty much everyone I reached out to for blurbs, I quote in the book. That's another way to actually get people, is to process their feedback and tell them that you actually learned from it and incorporate it into your product or idea. So I reached out to Willie and said, hey, Adam was on. Adam generously gave me this quote, and it did it in a way that was thoughtful, but I didn't want Willie to think I was just, desperately asking him to be the first person. Because psychologically, we want social proof to make it easier for decisions. And so if someone, it's like when you have Cisco as a client and you go to Microsoft, and Microsoft takes you that much more seriously. So ultimately, influencer collaboration, there is an art and a science to it, and it's not defined by followers. And you yourself don't need followers. Like you used to have to go on Oprah to get your book discovered. And now you have my platform, like 200 people listened to my first podcast episode, my microphone was terrible. But I got these killer YouTube guests, and they didn't ask how much of my listenership was, but they came on because they want to talk about business, and they never get to talk about business. So ultimately, you have to think about the social proof people can give you through the collab as well, and then you can go to bigger influencers down the line. So this guy flew aboard that you in the back, who's one of my favorite people here, knew about. So what I realized once the last stage of sharing your idea is that collabing, you gotta keep collabing with the influencers and other folks that can help propel your idea. And you have to find your micro community. And this is a group that comes out after your early adopters, after your friends, and they are 3 archetypes of your ideal customer that you're baking and creating your product for. And finally, creatively branding yourself. I realized a trend that the influencers I spoke with all had 4 syllables or less for their names. WTF, Nerdist, Rooster Teeth, Rocket Jump, and they all often had hard consonants. So my podcast is now called Stories from the Influencer Economy. Let's be honest. Now you laugh at that? Oh my God, like I tried to be funny and then and now you're like laughing at my name. Tough crowd in Durham. So I ended up calling it the Influencer Economy because I wanted to brand the book around it and create a community, which was amazingly, it's what happened. But I go to conferences and people search for influencer and 50 podcasts come up, and they search for Ryan Williams and there's 50 Williamses that pop up. So I have my new company, it's Ryno Lab, I'm renaming the podcast. The logo is a lot more interesting than a bunch of like city skylines and influencers and all that stuff. And it's all about stories, it's the same format. I'm redoing it, it's gonna be t-shirts. I found that like swag was, people think startup t-shirts are annoying. I go to South by Southwest. Anyone here go to South by Southwest? Groundworks Labs is repping their t-shirts. T-shirts are great, but oftentimes like influencers that have a big community sell their merch, and that's like how they survive very early on. So ultimately I have coaching and I work with entrepreneurs, and my ambition is to start a school and to use these principles as launch framework for an alternative MBA. So I feel like, who here went to business school? And who here, honestly, is using a lot of those skills now that they feel like they learned at school versus what, if you're using most of the stuff you've learned since then? Because I don't really use my college degree, I don't know. And did you all go to business school like at Duke or Carolina? And a lot of people here. Okay. So that's like 2 people nodding. So ultimately, the last step is thrive. Anyone here heard of VidCon? It's a massive YouTube conference in Anaheim. I went to the very first one. It was a hotel in Los Angeles in the Century City neighborhood. It's 1,000 YouTube creators meeting their fans, right? YouTube creators, fans, and companies all merging. They now have 20,000 people going to Anaheim at the convention center. Started by these 2 guys called the Vlog Brothers. Anyone heard of them? It's these 2 gentlemen, Hank and John Green. John Green actually went on to write A Fault in Their Stars. I'm sure there's a lot of Teen Lit fans in here. And that was turned into a movie. So ultimately, this VidCon conference is globally renowned. And ultimately, the influencer economy, what I realized is people are givers. And I actually quote Adam Grant because his book, Give and Take, which I really highly recommend, is he classifies people as 3 archetypes in business. There's givers, and there's takers, and there are matchers. So of that group, who would you imagine fails the most? Takers. Who succeeds the most? Givers, right? You think so. But ultimately, givers fail the most, and they succeed the most. And his hypothesis, which he proved, was that givers aligned with their self-interests while giving thrive the most. Interests not aligned with your giving, you fail. You're not giving with purpose. So you have to give with purpose. And ultimately, matchers are what most of us are, like quid pro quo, you help me, I help you. It's a survival thing. You want to work with matchers and givers. Takers, I see a couple in this room. I'm not going to tell you who. But ultimately, takers you have to work with, right? But you want to weed them out. So Adam Grant actually, he works with Google and big companies to help weed out takers in the interview process. So meeting people IRL. Who here does not know what IRL means? I love it. I love the honesty. I love the honesty. It means in real life. It's not URL, it's IRL. It's a joke I wrote last night. So IRL means in real life, And it means meeting people, going to conferences, driving the extra 10 miles to meet the customer that's been loyal to you, going to VidCon. What I found with influencers is they make the conferences smaller. So they may have 20,000 people at VidCon, but they plan influencer dinners, influencer lunches. They connect 10 people in a group to meet with each other, and they don't care if they get credit for the intro. So doing smaller events that other influencers can meet people is a great way to build not only your network, but establish yourself as a leader in your field. And finally, the last step, which this really resonates when I talk to people in college, because I don't know how many people here are under the age of 25. So there's a lot of people in your, I'm aging myself, I told you I have 2 kids, but, so I'm 39 years old. And people in their early 20s, they would like meaning in their jobs. It's very different. Like I've hired younger folks, and I hate the term millennial because only advertisers should be using that word. It's not like you go around saying I'm a millennial, because it's just a weird thing to think about as you're branding your identity. But ultimately, millennials want meaning in their career. And I've hired people for less money that want more ownership of their work, more control, and that's what influencers equally do with their community. They empower them to hand the brand over, they hand over their identity, and they get the community's feedback and the involvement, and they're always listening and they're aware of what the community's needs or wants. They build their products around what they want. Hannah Hart, who I talk about here, she is a YouTube creator. Anyone here heard of My Drunk Kitchen? It's a YouTube show where she gets drunk and makes like food. It's really funny, trust me. And now she has like celebrities on there to make food drunk with her. And she's very famous in the online world. But ultimately, she did a tour because her fans demanded it. She went to Winnebago, across the country, and made drunk food in people's kitchens. This has been my life for 2 years. Like, this is the reality I've lived in, talking to people, going on tour, getting drunk in kitchens, making food. But ultimately, she's also a lesbian. And part of her undervalued community was making videos, how do you know you're a lesbian? You know, how do you, like, what's it like to kiss a woman? Like, things that she didn't intend to talk about, but once you have a platform, I'm seeing a very big trend with these types of people where advocacy or an opportunity to represent underserved voices is actually part of who you are. It's not what you are, but it's a smaller definition. And I mentioned I was depressed in my 20s, and I'm married now, I have 2 kids. Don't worry about me. But I went through a very tough period. And anyone here heard of Moz? The marketing company out of Seattle, they do analytics. So I reached out through cold email to this guy named Rand Fishkin. And I had Brad Feld, who started Techstars, on my podcast. And I said, hey, I just reached out cold. I was like, hey, I had Brad on my podcast, you're friends with him. Will you come on and talk about depression? Because he wrote an article about how he was depressed as a founder because he was blaming all of his problems with his product on himself. So we talked openly and honestly about depression. It's the first time I really shared my story about stand-up comedy days. And I was really nervous. I didn't know what the reaction would be. And strangely, I was surprised. I got a client out of it. Someone said, hey, I heard your podcast. I still get tweets from people all over the world that appreciate the honesty of Rand talking forthcomingly. I'm doing a speaking gig in LA because they heard that podcast. And I was really surprised because it didn't matter to me, but now that's a smaller part of what I do. I think it's creative people being depressed. And this could also be as simple as you fighting for product features that people feel like only a smaller part of your community want, but you still want to represent them. So ultimately, the ownership piece is the final element that is crucial and undervalued. So why do you write a book? I mean, anyone here written a book?
I'm writing one right now.
You're writing one, what's it called?
It's called The Zombie Business Cure.
Zombie Business Care?
Cure.
See, it's a great title. So you write a book to get your foot in the door to build a platform for yourself. I started podcasting before the podcast serial came out. I was an early adopter. I believe most of us in this room will be writing books in a couple years. It could be a 99-cent book, but think about it. You launched a successful startup, you launched a failed startup. Writing an ebook, 5,000 to 10,000 words, 99 cents at Amazon, you're an author. Like, I'm here right now, not because I'm tight and I'm cool and I tell funny stories, because obviously you're not laughing all the time. It's because of the book. It gets your foot in the door. The podcast got my foot in the door. I think the next big trend I'm seeing and where I'm going with my business is online courses, on demand, people training and teaching and doing things that you can make passive income from while you're not working, and it's all in the archives of your website. So ultimately, if y'all want to help me, you could leave an Amazon review for the book if you like it. It really helps with searching. I'll have some books if y'all want to talk afterwards. And if you anywhere here use Goodreads, wow. Okay, never mind. If you have Goodreads, please add those 4 people to your bookshelf. And then I have a free action guide and lesson guide, Influencer Economy. But yeah, please say hi afterwards. I'd love to talk to you all and learn more what you're up to. Thank you very much for having me here in Durham and all the good work you're doing here. Oh yeah, questions for anyone?